Please welcome Mr. Steve Grooms of the Montana Defense Alliance.
Yay.
Good afternoon and welcome back after that fantastic lunch. On behalf of the Montana Defense Alliance, which is based in Great Falls, Montana, associated with Wing 1 at the 341st Missile Wing, we are pleased to be part of the Strategic Deterrence Coalition and to be a sponsor in this monumental symposium. I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator for our first panel this afternoon, discussing the future of the nuclear triad and understanding deterrence. Our moderator is Major General Select Thomas A. Bussier. General Bussier is the Deputy Director for Nuclear, Homeland Defense, and Current Operations, Joint Staff at the Pentagon. He is also the previous wing commander for the 509th Bomber Wing here at Whiteman Air Force Base, so he's returning to familiar surroundings and faces. It is my pleasure to turn the podium over to Major General Select Bussier.
Thank you, Steve. All right, post-lunch forum.
Coveted.
All right, the coveted position on the itinerary. So before I open up the discussion for our distinguished commanders at the table, I'd like to first pass on my thanks and appreciation to Joe Scallarns and all he has done. Can you imagine an army of little Joes running around? With the passion, the persistence, the energy to do what we are seeing here today and stretching us intellectually about strategic deterrence and the value of a triad and the value of nuclear weapons for the United States of America. I'd offer to you today that today's the beginning, not the end. So today's the beginning of the journey of educating those across the fabric of this country, building a common level of understanding, and getting some advocates out there. The other person I'd like to thank is Dr. Ambrose. Are you in here? Dr. Ambrose. You know, we were talking at lunch, again, if you want to have a model of success for a military community university partnership, I'd say you have to look no further than UCM. And again, as you know, most things in life that happen well don't happen by mistake. And that is a testament to Dr. Ambrose's passion to make things better, not only for the university students, not only for the community, but for our military members in the local area. So before I introduce our distinguished panel members, I want to ask you a question and ask you if you've thought about this recently. And you don't have to show your hands. I did this at NDU a few weeks ago and asked about 100 to 120 young steely-eyed warriors from across the services. Who in the audience understands what nuclear deterrence really is? Who in the audience truly has been an advocate for what we all know is the foundation of our nation's defense? Who in the audience has had a conversation with their family or their neighbors in the last year, 5 years, 10 years, on what it is we are here to discuss today? So as you reflect upon that answer internally, I'd offer to you that the gentlemen before you have the privilege, as most of you know, of commanding our nation's most precious resource. And that is not the weapons or the weapon systems. That's obviously the sailors and the airmen that most commanders have the privilege of leading. But think for a moment on the size and scope of the nuke enterprise. Think about the 2010 census, so roughly about 307 million Americans in this great country. Think about the fact that less than 0.5% of this nation serves in all services across the department. Volunteers all, by the way. I don't think anyone in here in uniform was drafted. And then think about the number of steely-eyed warriors that are in the Navy and the Air Force that currently serve today in the three legs of the triad. Roughly 25,000 and growing in Air Force Global Strike Command and roughly 5,000 in the SSBN force in the Navy. So think about that percentage, roughly a little over 30,000 of 307 million, that maintain operate the nation's most deadliest weapons, and yet also provide us the great comfort to sleep well at night. So that's the context and the setup for what we have before us today. I would offer to you that, just like in World War II, our nation maybe owes a great level of gratitude to just a few great Americans that stand the watch every day across the fabric of the nuke enterprise. Today we are very, very honored to have both Vice Admiral Connor, who has probably one of the coolest names or titles in the Department of Defense, Commander of Submarine Forces, Commander of Submarine Forces Atlantic, and Commander of Allied Submarine Command. If that doesn't make your blood warm and make you all warm and fuzzy inside, I'm not sure you're an American. So Admiral Connor has commanded at every level. He's commanded at the squadron level, the submarine group level, the task force level, and currently serves as his capacity as the commander of submarine forces in the United States Navy, and also a dual-headed task force commander for Admiral Haney. Most of you are familiar with the fine American to his left, Lieutenant General Wilson, who has also commanded at every level in the Air Force, most recently 8th Air Force, the mighty 8th Air Force at Barksdale Air Force Base, and currently resides as the commander of Air Force Global Strike Command at Barksdale. Before you are the commanders of the three legs of our triad. So as we set up the panel today in the discussions of the future of the nuclear triad, we want to stretch your positions personally and professionally and intellectually on what the value of the triad is. And we'll be presenting that information here shortly, as well as testing your understanding of what deterrence really means. And I would offer to you, it's used every day. So without ado, Admiral Connor.
Okay, thanks, Tom. He had me confused when he said I had a really cool name because I grew up in Boston, and pretty much every block in the city had someone named Mike Connor, so it's not that unusual. And in keeping with Tom's theme, I'd like to just sort of take a survey of the room, and as you came in after lunch, who thought about what the oxygen level was in the room as you came in? Probably no one. I'm a submariner, I think about stuff like that. But that's kind of like deterrence too. When you have it and it's working, no one thinks about it. It's totally out of sight. And when it starts getting a little tenuous and you're gasping for air, it means a lot. And the problem with it is if you wait until you're gasping for air, it's probably too late, okay? So while you've heard from a lot of academics and theorists and high-level government officials, that's sort of not the part of the business that Sevi and I are in. We're kind of the blue-collar side of strategic deterrence. We deliver it. We deliver stuff that was designed by others. And I want to talk to you for a while in the way that I talk to the men and women on my ships. And for starters, the submarine force we do basically three different things in peacetime. We have the guys that go off and do intelligence and surveillance and learn about the capabilities that our potential adversaries might have. And that's a good chunk of our force. And then we have this other group that spends a lot of time working with the special forces, doing a counterterrorism mission. And in fact, you'd be amazed that when a leading, terrorist figure departs the planet, that we often had something to do with that. And we get a lot of public credit for that, or at least private credit amongst people who know. And it's all very exciting, and it's important somewhat, but I would say it's a little bit, I call it, it's whack-a-mole. We do things, it's pretty extraordinary. You can't always see the logic that went behind building it. But when we go kinetic, it's a very big thing. We work very closely with the folks who depart this airbase, and often we deliver missiles in parallel or slightly ahead of them, and the whole process comes together. It's a beautiful thing. But I want to talk about the other part, the most important part of the submarine force, which is carried in only 18 ships. And those are the ballistic missile ships. And so when I want to talk to someone, whether they're the people who handle the warheads on the ship, or operate the fire control system, or maybe just a guy who stands watch in engine room lower level, so that we maintain propulsion so that that weapon system has electricity and can stay submerged undetected. And I talk to them about what it is about what they do every day when they go to work that's so darn important. Here's what I tell them. I tell them that you doing what you do, filling up your portion of the strategic triad, is the difference between a world in which about 1% of the world population is killed every year as a result of major power conflict and the 0.1% we have with all these little conflicts we have bubbling around the world right now. So in other words, you have reduced fatalities this huge amount, and then the rest of the military is working on this final little piece that's left to make that as small as possible. That's what you do when you go to work. And that 1% number is kind of an average. It spikes from time to time. You know, during World War I, it was up to about 1.5%, and during World War II, we were pushing 3%. So if you look at the efficiency with which major powers could kill each other and those that are in the way through large-scale conventional war, the numbers are astounding. And yet the presence of this triad and all of the calculation that goes into making sure that we know and our potential high-end adversaries know that it really isn't worth getting into a major conflict, nuclear or conventional. That's what we do. That's what we deliver every day, and it's hugely important. And it's very important to me that the people doing the mission understand that, because that's why it's important that they show up for work on time, that they're highly skilled in the work that they do, that they look out for their fellow shipmates who are also very important to getting that mission done. And that's the way we approach the way we go to work in the morning. And that's what keeps us honest. That's why our reliability is so high. So I think the question is, for a group like this, is what's the language we're going to use to carry that message to the rest of the country and the rest of the people in the enterprise who support that very important work, and to know that if you're in this enterprise anywhere, whether it's on the industry side or on the support of the forces area, or you're actually doing it, that you're doing something that is important and noble. And oh, by the way, it's also hugely efficient. We often hear talk about the cost of reconstituting the strategic deterrent on both the Navy side and the Air Force side. People go, can we afford it? Can we afford that? So go back to what I just said. If this structure that is put in by this capability is taking the level of violence in the world down 97% or so from whatever it would be, for this 1% to 2% of the defense budget, of course we can afford it. Of course we can afford it. And when we rebuild we're going to start building our submarines again, because the ones that we designed to last 30 years, we've been able to extend them to 42 years, but that's about all we can do. You wouldn't want your children going hundreds of feet underwater in something that's, that is beyond its life. And we have exhausted our engineering techniques for being able to confidently say that past 42 years we can do that. So we're going to start reconstituting that fleet, and when we do, the ships are going to cost about $5 billion. And we're going to build 12 of them over a period of about 15 years. And so the years that we build one, that will be about 1% of the defense budget. And I'm telling you, that's a bargain. And so just a little more context on the spending, because you always hear we can't afford this. You know, the defense budget, right, so it's about 1% of the defense budget. The defense budget is about 17% of the federal budget. And it's been about that for a long time. I think it's sort of coasting down from about 20 to 17. You know, back when we started the triad, it was over 50% of the federal budget. Now, it's not that the defense spending has gone down. It's stayed level and spiked when we've had conflicts. But the issue is that the other aspects of the federal budget have just ballooned out of control. So when you're looking at how you're going to reduce your costs, or how you can afford this deterrent, which is important to maintaining the peace, you can't just be looking in this stable part of the budget that is in fact drifting down as a percentage. You really have to look at, well, where's the thing that's spiraling out of control? So I make no apologies for what these things cost. We get a lot for it, and it's well worth it. And then the other thing that I'd say when I talk to my troops about the triad, I says, look at the people who designed it. So there's people like, who are well known in the Air Force, you know, Curtis LeMay, Arleigh Burke from the Navy. The presidents that were rolled up in this, it was President Truman, it was President Eisenhower, and President Kennedy when we sort of finalized the whole process and had the three legs operating. And you think, what do those people have in common? So every one of them, whether they're the admirals, the generals, or the presidents, each one of those people had served in at least one and maybe two world wars. And they witnessed firsthand what violence on a massive scale looks like. And they put their minds together, along with all those think tanks and consultants we talked about before, and came up with a scheme that would ensure that violence on that level never happened again. And we're about 60 years of success into that. And we need to make sure that we don't forget what the origins of that success were, because it's this generation here that needs to remember, that needs to teach, that needs to invest, so we can continue that. Because if we don't, we're going to have to learn the hard way all over again. So with that, I'll pass to my brother Sevi.
Well, it's great to be here today. It's great to be on this panel with my battle buddy. What most people don't know is that Mike and I got a relationship growing up in our military career, serving on task forces together. I went to his CMOC school. When we had our incident, I call our unignorable moment a little over a year ago, one of the first persons I called was Mike, who gave me some great advice, and we, in essence, modeled our force improvement program on stuff that the Navy has done. So we've got a great partnership, and you won't find a bigger fan than me than for what our United States Navy does for our triad. Let me pull a couple of the strings that Mike just talked about. I just got to go this last summer to Paris. I got invited by my French counterpart to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the French Strategic Forces, and it happened to be the 70th anniversary of the French Air Force. It also coincided with the 100th anniversary of the start of World War I. And so got to join our Chief of Staff while we laid a wreath at the Lafayette Escadrille outside of Paris. If you haven't been there, you should go see it. It's really cool. It's where our Air Force really got its birthplace. But the air in Europe in the summer of 2014 was really palpable with the remembrance of World War I. And it was that 100th anniversary of the start. And I actually went up and did a little research looking at World War I, and we lost 16 million people during that war, with 20 million people injured. And then yet, less than a generation later, we're engaged in another great war in Europe. It starts in Europe that then proceeds throughout the rest of the world. And the conservative number is 68 million people were killed in World War II, with 100 million injured before nuclear weapons. So to pick up on Mike's point, I went to a small state agricultural college. I did some little college math. I'm going to say the war really started in the summer of 1939 and went through 1945. And so for the 60-some-odd months of the war, 68 million people were killed, or 1.1 million a month for 60 months, or 40,000 a day for 60 months. Is that, I mean, we can't comprehend that now. And what's changed is this weapon came along that has deterred wars between great powers. And it's done that for 70 years. And so that's what nuclear weapons bring to the table every single day. And like Mike says, and General Herensack is so fond of saying, we use those weapons every single day to deter adversaries. We've got a lot of big efforts underway. I'll be happy to talk about any of the modernization programs between, we have our current Minuteman III, what we have going, and our new weapon system, the ground-based strategic deterrent, the follow-on for the Minuteman. Between our current bombers, the B-52 and B-2, but as we bring on the new long-range strike bomber, as we bring on new weapons, the B-61-12 or the LRSO, what we're doing with NC-3, but I just want to spend a small moment talking about the human weapon system, and I think arguably the most important endeavor we're undertaking in our command today. Mike and I get to go sit on this group with the Secretary of Defense occasionally. It's called the Nuclear Deterrence Enterprise Review Group. And one of the last ones, then Secretary of Defense Hagel asked, what are we doing to improve deterrence thinking in the 21st century? Right? And this forum is a great start to things like that. So Joe and Dr. Ambrose and the folks that are doing all this, thank you very much, because we need to start this conversation across America. But within our command, what we're doing is we've got 4 interlapping efforts going underway. Started by Major General Rich Clark sitting here in the front row when he was the vice. But we put together a team and said, what are we going to be able to do, both tactically, operationally, strategically, and how do we bring in all the academia and industry around the country that's working on this problem set and focus it to be able to help our nation in strategic deterrence. So to start with, we've got a thing we're going to call the Leadership Development Center. It's going to be for our command. It's going to be primarily airmen at different touch points in their lives to develop them, to their understanding of nuclear weapons and effects, and what does deterrence mean from their vantage point, and how do we grow that leadership cadre early. It's not just airmen, it's going to be civilians, it's going to be our enlisted force through this Leadership Development Center. I'll give you an example. One of the things we'll stand up this summer that I think will be a really fantastic school is a school called SANS, the School for Advanced Nuclear Deterrence Studies. It's going to be in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Sandia is there, so I think there's a nice little fit between Sandia and SANS. But to grow a generation of thinkers, it'll have a core curriculum, it'll have electives, it'll have experiential part of it where we'll send them out to all the national labs, to all the combatant commands, to all the different touch points of nuclear enterprise to grow somebody who really gets foundationally what does nuclear deterrence mean and how does it matter. We're going to invite all the biggest, smartest thinkers from around the country into this course, and that's just one small segment under our Leadership Development Center. Next, how do we raise that level of thinking across our whole United States Air Force? So working with General Quast at Air University and with AETC so that every developmental education opportunity that we have for our Air Force, for our officer enlisted, that they get exposed to nuclear. And what does nuclear deterrence mean? And what does it mean as we learn more about it in this 21st century and the different aspects of it? Next, at the higher level, how do we get engaged at the national policy level to influence and have a voice like we should have, and which we've kind of gotten away from? And so General Herensack and the A-10 guys, the A-9 guys on the half staff, to be able to have an analytics cell working with our Navy partners, working with Stratcom, to be able to have a voice in the national discussion. And then lastly, I see Dr. Yawson over here. If you haven't got this little handout, he left our command. He left our command to stand up something that's called, what's that? On good terms. This is again, I think what he's starting here is really also really important. It's the Center for Assurance, Deterrence, Escalation, and Non-Proliferation Science and Education, called Cadence. And Cadence is an organization under the Louisiana Tech Research Institute. to be able to bring in academia from all over the world and all over our country that is focused on our nuclear problem, and is providing both, it can be policy, it's technology, it's things that we think are important. Let me just give you an example. The Louisiana Tech guys came and talked to me a little over a year ago. They were working with our Air Force Research Lab, and they said, hey, we started doing some work with graphene. We think we can actually grow graphene economically and cheaply, and if we put a graphene coating around electronics, it makes it EMP hardened, as hardened as if it's inside a Faraday cage, with a very thin 3-millimeter coating of graphene. Well, they got my complete and undivided attention when they started talking about that. That becomes a game changer. But that's being done by a local research institute in our backyard. They're in every state, across the country, of people doing that type of research. And so how do we harness that capability to help us? But ultimately, we're trying to develop this human weapon system that is able to understand and articulate nuclear deterrence in the 21st century. And again, we're just starting now, but it's going to be from our youngest airmen as they enter the command, through a graduated program, through our educational pieces, through every developmental school that we go through in our Air Force, then leveraging the horsepower in the Pentagon and our combatant commands, and with our industry and academia partners. So I think this is, again, one of the biggest initiatives we got forward, but it starts the conversation across our country about why why it's so important and why it matters. You know, Mike and I sat on a panel about 15 months ago. Here's what we did not talk about. We did not talk about ISIS. We did not talk about Crimea or Ukraine or Ebola or Boko Haram. None of that, because it hadn't happened 15 months ago. And so when we talk about this uber complex world we live in, it really is complex. We heard today from all the speakers about what's happening in technology. I went back and read last night the 2010 Nuclear Posture Review. And there's lots of people who said, yeah, you know, we need to have another one of those. I don't disagree. But when you look at the assumptions that went into the Nuke Posture Review, I would argue it makes what we're doing even more important today than in 2010. The landscape has changed so much in those 5 years. If you read the 2010 Nuke Posture Review, it talks about Russia and our relationship and our partnership, and they're not an adversary, and we're working forward on all these initiatives. And I think, how are we doing there? Talks about North Korea. This is before North Korea launched its stuff into space, before they exploded another nuclear weapon, before they threatened US citizens. Okay, a lot has changed. Again, I would argue it makes what we do, the importance of our triad, the attributes of our triad, you know, the attributes, what I'd say, when Mike and I talk about the different attributes, I'd say they apply to all of the triad, whether it be flexible or responsive, survivable, visible. They all have aspects of that, but they tell our adversaries, not today. I won't engage the United States. It's too important. Anyway, so we look forward to your questions, and let me just stop right there. Thanks.
Okay, we're going to move on to the question period. We're going to change the venue just slightly. We're going to use the microphones. So if you wouldn't mind just raising your hand if you have a question, we'll get you a microphone. If you could state your name and then your organization and the question, please.
Sir, Rich Clark, 8th Air Force. For both of you, you just talked about the triad and how each leg has certain aspects of the characteristics that we look for in our nuclear deterrent force. How do you answer people who say, given our current budget situation, our financial situation in the country, that maybe we should go to a dyad, take one of the legs off the triad, lower costs, still have some of the attributes that we're looking for in our force? How do you answer people who bring that topic to you?
I guess I'll start. Here's how I answer, Rich, on a couple fronts. Mike talked about the budget. Here's what I tell people about our Air Force budget for two legs of the triad. My Air Force budget is 5% of our Air Force budget for two legs of the triad. I'm less than 1% of the DoD budget. I'm a fraction of the federal budget for 2 legs of the triad. I hear people say often, well, why don't we go away from missiles because they don't provide any real capability to our nation. And so I'd say let's fairy dust that away. Let's close our eyes and say there's no such thing anymore as ICBMs. So we have a dyad. We have bombers and subs. We heard earlier today that North Korea, we think, the newspapers say, possesses 20 nuclear weapons. And then I want you to go around the country and picture in your mind the submarine bases, the bomber bases, the national labs, and the infrastructure that would support everything involved with the nuclear enterprise. And if you did that, you'd come up with a number less than 10. And say, are you willing to bet our nation and the survival of our nation to a country like North Korea that possesses twice as many weapons as we would have targets for to take out both the intellectual capacity, the production capacity, or the delivery capacity for the remaining 2 legs of the triad? And again, I go back to even during when we go through all these major recapitalization efforts going forward, we think we'll balloon the defense spending for those modernization efforts to about 5% of the DoD budget. I think we have the money. I think we just need to prioritize where it goes and the importance of it.
So I would add to General Wilson's comments that the various legs of the triad are extremely complementary. So, you take the sovereign U.S. territory-based ICBM, fastest response possible because they're always ready. More survivable than people give them credit for because they're so widely dispersed. The idea that you would be making, that someone who is trying something preemptive would be making a massive attack on U.S. territory. That is a major commitment on their part, and probably the last commitment they'll ever make, but it's unambiguous as to what they're doing. Hugely important. The submarine leg is the one that is clearly understood by all countries as being inherently survivable. And you really can't spend enough money in the right way to put the whole force at risk because they can maneuver anywhere in the world. There's no target in the world. As the world changes and we get more nuclear powers, if we do, as we appear to be doing, there's nothing that they can't get in the right spot to take care of, so they can hold an adversary at risk. And then there's the manned bomber. It hurts me to say this as a submariner, but I think the manned bomber when you have this sort of rogue scenario of an Iran or a North Korea, and you want to have this image of, before I do this, take this very powerful step to make this threat go away. I would like to have the opportunity to use every diplomatic tool possible up until the very end. And the thing that inspires confidence in the country, in our processes like that, is the fact that there's a person in the aircraft right up to the very end who can talk back to someone in CONUS as the scenario plays out. That is a confidence-building measure that, although we will apply as much force as is required to solve the problem, we will certainly do every other thing possible until we have to take that bold step. So they really complement each other. And then you start looking at the messaging we can do. You can hold something at risk from Wyoming, but it's hard to show that several thousand miles away. On the other hand, you can fly an aircraft in the region, and everyone knows what that aircraft could do. And similarly, we can choose to show a submarine when we want to, and then we can measure the response on our adversaries, and we do that. We will intentionally stimulate the system a little bit, just to see how much they care, see what they would do, see who talks to who when that happens, and that gives you some insight into the calculus of your adversary. So none of these are standalone. Again, the people who put this system together put a great deal of thought into it, and the fact that we have 3 legs to it is not making it hugely expensive. So let's stop pretending that it is, and continue to sustain this balance, which has sustained the peace.
Next question.
Brian Bradley, Nuclear Security and Deterrence Monitor. The House Armed Services Committee last week released its version of the FY16 National Defense Authorization Act. And one provision of the bill directed, I believe it directed DoD to communicate more on strategic forces. It noted that on a couple occasions, Congress heard about issues amongst the forces through press reporting before it heard from the service. So I was wondering, what is your assessment about the level of communication between the service and Congress, and does more need to be done? Thank you.
Do you say General or Admiral? What I can tell you is we try and be as open and as transparent as quickly as we possibly can on anything that involves our nuclear force. That if we look at this, last 18 months as an example, both the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, the Secretary of the Air Force, the whole leadership team of the Air Force were completely transparent and as forthcoming as possible. We're not going to try and duck away from issues. And as soon as we know them, we're going to get engaged and make sure that our leadership chain, me personally, if any issues arise, I'm on the phone to our Chief of Staff and to Admiral Haney, and I know he's doing the same with the Chairman and the SecDef, and certainly General Heronsak's involved in all those, and we're trying to get the word out on both sides of the river as quickly as possible. So I think we can always do better, but we certainly are trying hard to be as open, as transparent as possible.
We're pretty much the same. We have a fairly mature process that we don't like to exercise too often, but we do when we have to. When there's a problem on a ship or any other facility in the Navy that warrants the congressional notification, we get the information up the chain of command to our fleet leadership and our Chief of Naval Operations. And in parallel with that, our Office of Legislative Affairs notifies at least key members of Congress. It's not usually done through a public affairs forum. It's done through a staff notification methodology. And then we give them initial reports of what we know, when we knew it, and then we follow up as needed. But that process, I think, is more mature than many people think. That doesn't mean we throw ourselves out for on Twitter every time someone stubs their toe either. And in many cases, when we get indications of a possible problem, we do in fact take the time to see if the initial report is valid, because there's a lot of stray energy that comes out when you start reacting to things that actually weren't there. So we think we're good, but we think we're balanced. Lisa.
I am Lisa Finneran with General Dynamics. So both of you obviously have talked about the importance of the nuclear triad, and you've talked about what you tell the men and women who we've entrusted on the care of these weapon systems. I'm kind of curious if you guys would be willing to share, what are they telling you? So when you talk to them about the importance of their mission and what they're doing, do they have dissenting opinions? Do they share that with you, or are they all on board and they're good to go?
I'll start by saying that that most people get a little spring in their step when you explain to them why they're doing what they're doing. And the senior enlisted advisor on a submarine, he's called the chief of the boat. And, you know, so in my command tour, I sat down and I talked to my cobb, as he's called, and said, you know, we got to tell the guys what we're out here for. You know, some of them are cleared for the high-end stuff. Some of them just go back to the engine room and make the screw turn and make the generators make electricity. And I said, we need to tell them the plan. And he said, well, he goes, Captain, he goes, you got to understand, long-range planning for some of these guys is what's for dinner. and so and that was how I sort of approached it a little bit for a while. But I came to realize that the more you tell people about why they're doing what they're doing, the better they do it. And that was true somewhat for people our age. For the millennials that we're bringing into the force right now, much, much more important. They want to know more than that they're getting a paycheck and they're getting a vacation and that they're working at a high skill level. They want to know how they fit into the big picture. And it's very easy for us to underestimate how important that is to the youngest people in our force.
Let me give you two recent examples, and I think you'd see this at any of our wings that you go to. At Malmstrom Air Force Base, we just had a captain, and he was a Air Force Academy grad, 3.8 degree physics major, went to missiles, and it wasn't his first choice. And his 4 years were coming due, and he could have gone and done anything he wanted in the Air Force. He went to his group commander and said, I want to stay. He said, there's something that's changed here in the last year. I can see the difference. I can see the empowerment of our airmen. And this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be part of something bigger and to start it from scratch, and I want to be part of it. And so I think you'll see that happening in our wings. I don't think that was always the case. I think we talked about the importance of it, but we didn't back it up. They didn't physically see it. They saw lots of infrastructure and other things that were not where it should have been. But I think the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and the Secretary have put their money where their mouth is. This last year, the FY16 budget is $5.6 billion more than it was a year ago in the nuclear enterprise, and the folks out in the field are starting to see the things change. You know, whether it be new vehicles or new uniforms or new radios, they're seeing the investment in the infrastructure, but not just that, the investment in them. And when you articulate and you talk to them about the importance of the mission, I sense they get it. They really do understand how important their mission is. I was just recently at F.E. Warren with Tracy Hayes' wing, and Admiral Haney was there for the ICBM stakeholder meeting. We went out to talk to some new security force airmen, what we call the model defender. Now, most people think the model defender is the new uniform that they're wearing, and they are wearing a new uniform. It's the OCP. It's a new camouflage uniform, and it's a better uniform. It's 7 layers. It's got the Gen 3 cold weather gear. It's good stuff, but it's much more than just the uniform. It's the training we're putting them through, the certification that they get. They're part of a convoy or a tactical response force, and you can see their bounce and their step, and they are proud of what they're doing. And so I think they do get it. I think that and it's a couple examples, but it's indicative of what you're seeing at all of our wings, that they realize the importance of the mission, and that they're ultimately the ones doing the mission today.
So if I could add one more thing, so the other thing that's true of the young people we have in the force today is that they can read. And among the things that they can read are budgets. So General Wilson and I can do our talking about the importance of the mission and how important it is that they do their job. But we have a way of expressing the priorities that we have in the country, and the way we do that is through the federal budget. So to carry this argument all the way through, the words that we say have to match the numbers that are in the federal budget that shows that their country really does have this mission as a priority, and they will follow through with their promises that they're making.
let me even tap on that. So if you talk to the wing commanders, we got a couple of them here, both Kristen and Tracy, and they'll be on the afternoon panel. What I think you're seeing is this empowerment that we're starting on. In the past, it may have been 10 years ago that just do what we tell you to do. And we realize that's not a recipe for success. That when you meet these young airmen and they feel empowered to do their job, you really just got to clear out the obstacles to their success and just watch them do amazing things. Kristen's got an airman in her medical group who's a high school computer programmer, guy, and he's in the medical group. And he was a data administrator, and so he would take data that he would take from this computer and he'd put it in this computer. In the old days, somebody said, well, your job was to take data from that computer to this. And he said, well, this 20-year-old airman, there's got to be a better way. So he built a computer program that automates that now. It's being used DoD-wide, right? A guy who's been in the Air Force for less than 2 years, 20 years old. That's what's going on in all of our units, in Mike's submarines, in our flight lines, in our missile fields, that these really smart, talented people are figuring out a better way of doing business. So part of our job is to make sure that we can remove the obstacles from their success and empower them to believe in that they can make a difference. And again, when it's backed up with the resources, they're doing some pretty amazing things.
Thank you. I'm Pete Illoway, and I'm from Cheyenne, Wyoming. And I get it. We're here, but we all get it. The rest of the country, how do we get what we're saying and what you're all saying, how do we get it out to the citizens, the 300 million people that are wondering about spending money for protection, and whether it's our missiles or our subs or our bombers? Nothing's happened. How do we tell them it's because we have what we have? How do we articulate what you're all saying out to the citizens of the country?
I think we have to overcome our hesitancy to talk more. I grew up, we proudly called ourselves the silent service. We never, few people still know what we actually do when we go on patrol or where we go. But that doesn't mean we can't get, and we flat out, we don't communicate for months. That doesn't mean we can't get a lot better at explaining, sort of a day in the life for the people who work on the ships in a way that it will be more tangible to the public. We actually watch how the Russians do this, and when they do a national level exercise of the type that we do, the president of Russia is an active participant in it. That's probably a stretch for us, but certainly the steps that Admiral Haney is taking to have a much more integrated national level exercise that draws all the legs of the triad together is step number one. And then there's some targeted communications that go with what we do. And hey, we just did this exercise, and we just did this, and here's why we did that, and here's why this missile is so important. We could get much better at products for public consumption that show what this system of systems does. Very along the same lines, the protective part of the system, the things we have in the missile shield, we could talk a little bit more about that. That's a little bit of a two-edged sword, because as we talk about the systems that defend against small numbers of, Iranian or North Korean missiles, the problem that we actually have there is the Russians believe in their heart of hearts, because I've had some of them tell me, that system that we have can overcome some massive Russian strike. And so the more we talk about it, the more it threatens people that we want to actually assure, to say, hey, We don't want you to worry about this. We want you to worry about our offensive capability and behave. But, so it's a little bit of a two-edged sword. But we could do much better in a public forum to show your strategic forces at work every day.
Pete, I'd only add that, all of our civic leaders and all of our partners need to help be storytellers, to tell the story of what's going on around the world, some of the threats we face, some of the things, why it does what we matter, why it matters. So let me give you an example. We're here at 509th Bomb Wing, home of the B-2, the most amazing bomber built. It's truly incredible. I think Admiral Haney was over today looking at the weapon storage area, and he probably saw the massive ordnance penetrator. And it's the best technology that America can build. It is an unbelievable weapon. It's in the 30,000-pound class. If I were to line it up, it's about as wide as this table. It's 21 feet long. It doesn't miss. Right? All the tests we've done, it doesn't miss. It is the Uber bunker buster. Right? That's what it's designed to do. Right? It leaves a B-2 from above 40,000 feet. It hits the ground doing 1.7 Mach. It's special alloys, special fusing. It's 2.5 tons of high explosive. Okay, got that picture? Everybody got that picture? Unbelievable. If I were to turn then to a warhead on one of Mike's D5 missiles or one of our Mark 21 or Mark 12 warheads, the missile is about the size of me, the warhead on top. It's about 5.5 feet, about that wide at the bottom, and it packs the explosive power of 583 miles of unbroken MOPS. So I could line up MOPS from here to Barksdale Air Force Base and have room left over, and that's the power of one nuclear warhead. That's why they're different, that's why they're treated different, that's why they're game changers, and we're not the only people who have them. There's a whole bunch of countries around the world today that have them, some not friendly to us. They're the only existential threat to our nation. That's why we have to have a credible deterrent for it. And we need everybody's help to help tell the story.
I think another way to tell that story would be to, maybe we get the press to come out to Omaha when we have one of these biannual deterrence seminars that they have in a public forum. Anyone in the world can come, and they do. And you start talking to the countries about why they came. And you'll see, Australia is there, Japan is there, South Korea is there, France, the UK, China's there, Russia's there actually. And they all have different reasons. So some of them want to come and talk to us because they want to know about our responsible command and control and all that. Many of those countries are there because they want to reassure themselves that our strategic deterrent is in fact credible. Because if they think it's not, they're going to have to go build their own. And some of those countries can, and if they were to do so, if a Japan or a South Korea, very technically capable countries, felt the need to build their own strategic deterrent because they lost confidence in ours, and then the fact that one or more of those countries got one radiated through that extremely complex security environment of Northeast Asia. I mean, it would be hugely destabilizing. So they assume that they're okay because they think we got their back. And that would be a great way to tell the story about how our credible weapons system is in fact a major tool in non-proliferation around the world. That is not an aspect that many people understand, and we could probably push that a little harder.
Thank you. Carl Purdy, Northrop Grumman. I know I'm about to oversimplify a complex challenge. Given our budget the state. Could you please give a few comments and maybe label each leg of the triad as either sustain, modernize, or replace, keeping in mind?
I'll start with the submerged leg of the triad. So we're in both, we're in a couple of camps there. We're in the replace for the submarine, because as I've told you, we've taken the hulls as far as they can go. And then we're in a modernize with the weapons system, both what is on the submarine and what is within the missile. So there's a modernized combat system on the submarine that basically brings up to the state-of-the-art technology, and computer technology and so forth. Within the missile, we've replaced many of the components which contain technology that is decades out of date now, with state-of-the-art, so we can take the system somewhere through about 2040, 2045. So that would be considered a modernization. And I think that covers it for the submerged leg.
And I'd echo what Mike said. We're doing both sustainment and modernization of every program that we have. So let me try and go down the list real quick. For our bombers, we're certainly going to need to sustain. Well, I would say for our bombers, if we are undersubscribed on long-range strike as an Air Force. And so we're going to continue to sustain our current bombers, but we're also building a new long-range strike bomber. And we're looking forward to, that will be a dual-capable bomber. They'll be out in the mid-2025 time period. In addition to those bombers, the weapons on those bombers are going to be both sustained and modernized. So today we have Alchem, and the Alchem designed in the 70s, built in the early 80s to last 10 years. I'm on my 5th service life extension program for our Alchem. And so we're going to sustain that until I can get a new one, we called the LRSO, and Congress, and we moved money to try and shift that to the left 2 years on this 16 budget. In addition, we'll modernize our weapons with the B-61, so we'll go from collapse all the different variants, the 3, 4, 7, and 10, into one, the B-61-12 that you heard General Klotz talk about, as well as the guided tail kit piece to that. For our ICBMs, again, our ICBMs, what most people don't realize, designed in the 50s, Minuteman I in the hole in 1962 at Malmstrom Air Force Base, and we still have, our Minuteman III still has Minuteman I parts associated with them. So the follow-on to that, we're going to sustain that until we can bring on the new one, the ground-based strategic deterrent. We're underway in that effort to have a new missile replacement for the Minuteman III in about the 2030 timeframe. In addition to that, we're doing the same thing with our NC3, because all those weapon systems can't do what we need them to do unless they can have assured communication with the president in the conditions wherever he is and however he needs to communicate. And so we're working hard today on how do we both sustain what we currently have for our NC3 as well as modernize for our future platforms. So that's the scope across bombers, weapons, ground-based strategic deterrent, and NC3.
Earlier was mentioned that about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a discussion, and it was not ISIS, Crimea, and other emerging now issues were not mentioned then. For a simple reason, they didn't exist. Mm-hmm. My question is, could those presently emerging threats or issues be predicted then based on the applied and strategic analysis? Thank you.
Go ahead.
So I would say that the situation we saw in Crimea, that we see in the eastern Ukraine, and the things that we see in the Trans-Sahara region in Africa right now are not as unpredictable as the press would lead you to believe. So how many people in here have read The Clash of Civilizations? So that was written in 1996. Very accurately predicted that the Russian civilization would seek to regain control of Crimea at some point in the future. And then it was even as specific enough to say that they would also stake out the eastern part of Ukraine as well. Pretty amazing to me how accurate that was. There was no time put on it, but it was because it was a civilizational thing. It was the Orthodox civilization that wanted to gain that territory back. And then you apply that logic to, well, the same logic does apply to some of the Baltic countries. So, which is why when my friend from Estonia keeps calling me frantically about the Russian train that's going to Kaliningrad that had 100 cars in it and stopped for no reason for 6 hours and moved on, that he's worried because maybe they're making, you know, strategic statements about what they could do using a train of all things. So not the specifics of ISIS, but certainly the desire to reestablish a caliphate that existed years ago is not a total surprise. And so once in a while we have to stop and not look at everything in the 24-hour news cycle and look at, you know, what did people say? What are their true allegiances? Are they loyal to their country first, or to their tribe, their family, and their religion first? And then try to understand what that means. If you try to apply that logic to something like if we allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon, how does that play through the competing needs of the Sunni and the Shia and the other radical elements out there? I have a hard time getting my arms around that, but there's a lot of PhDs in here, so maybe you've got it figured out. From my point of view, it would be nice if they just never got one, because the ability to draw a line around what's the worst thing they could do. I think someone talked about don't look at likely, look at the worst case analysis. It's a lot easier to bracket the worst case analysis if you don't let, if you can find a way to prevent countries like Iran from getting a nuclear capability.
I'd only add that we've been horrifically bad at predicting. You know, if we thought differently on December 6th than we did on December 8th, 1941, we thought differently on September 10th than we did on September 12th. We find ourselves constantly surprised. I'm a big proponent on making sure we have a good foundational relationship with those countries that are important to us. I talked to last night to Colonel Spaulding. You heard him talk today. I don't think we are where we should be with China or with Russia. This is my personal opinion. I was over in Beijing 18 months ago, and they talked about a new great power relationship between China and the U.S., and I told them, well, we have a difference of vocabulary, because relationship to relationship means a common understanding, shared experiences, and a common vocabulary, and we've never talked, so we can't have a relationship. I don't know what that means. I would argue today it's more important than it's ever been to have a relationship with Russia. The last time that I talked to my counterpart was in the summer of 2012 when he came to Barksdale and had dinner at my house. But today, in our world environment, I think it would be important that we have that understanding and a relationship built on trust. And to do that, we've got to talk and meet. My 2 cents.
The Admiral planted me, so I've got to do this. Do you think, especially, General, given your question, that our elected leaders understand this problem in the same way that you do? And are they receptive at personal and political levels?
I'll take this. I'll start this with this. I think they are. Not by choice, perhaps. If you had read the campaign rhetoric of our current president as he came into office, by his campaign rhetoric, we probably wouldn't be sitting here today talking about strategic nuclear deterrence. I think he was firmly in the global zero camp, so to speak. But then a funny thing happens when you get actual responsibility. And you have to now go from what your ideology is to a more a realistic approach. I'm confident that our president would love to have a world with no nuclear weapons. He said that. But he also realizes and has also said that as long as nuclear weapons exist, we will maintain a credible, capable deterrent. And now the facts on the ground are showing this administration. I learned first that when the older Indian officers, when the Russian representative there told a joke in Russian, that the older Indian folks laughed before the interpreter interpreted it. And I was reminded that there was a time when they were very close together. But the other thing I remember is I was asked by an Indian Navy commander, well, I wasn't asked, he just yelled at me, and he said, I have serious concerns about nuclear command and control in the United States. And I said, sir, why would you say that? And he said, I was watching Crimson Tide last week. So it's always amazes me how much people actually interpret what's really going on in our country through what they see in the movies. And I assured him that I did not take my dog to see, for example, but he didn't believe me. So back to who do you engage? Well, I think I noticed that one of the speakers this afternoon is from the Center for a New American Security, right? You here somewhere? And one of the things that I've found is really good is, you know, we tend to gravitate, when we want to talk to opinion makers, we first gravitate to the ones who think like us. So you go to the Brookings Institution and the Center for Strategic and Budget Assessments, and, you know, it's friendly territory. But if you really want to sharpen your game, you have to go to the people who, when they get up in the morning, they think what we're doing is flat out wrong. They're not bad people, but that's what they think when they get out of bed in the morning. And sit down and have an intelligent conversation with them about what you do, why you do it, how you spend your money, what the taxpayer gets out of it, and so forth. And you'll be surprised how much ground you can cover. And I won't say that you're going to make them show up for work the next day and say that they agree with you, but you certainly soften their stance. They certainly know that the people doing this mission, you know, love their children, and you know, they're not the evil people that they will think you are if they don't know you. You have to get to know the people who disagree with you. And it's actually a fairly enjoyable process that any of us can do. I used to do this for a living when I worked for the CNO a couple of years ago. And it would tell you what, it was like getting ready for a football game, you know, getting ready to go into some of these things. But it was very satisfying. And I still hear from a lot of the people that I sat across the table from. And they actually will send me their ideas on something and ask for my feedback. And with some groups, that's pretty good progress.
We're doing the same thing. So what Mike just talked about, encouraging those that don't think like us to come talk to us. We recently had Philip Yund, who's the COO of Plowshares, out to talk. I traveled with Philip to Beijing. We don't agree on most things. I find him really a really wonderful, smart, engaging guy. We're not going to agree, but I think I have a better understanding of why he thinks what he thinks, and I think he does of what we're doing across two legs of our triad also. So I think I couldn't agree more with Mike on that. I'd also tell you that as I look around the room, I see some of our civic leaders here, and I know what they're doing. I know they're engaging their members of Congress. I know they're meeting with their their military affairs committees and back in their bases and states, and they're helping spread the word. And we're all on this journey together now. And I'd say it's going to take all of us. And if I can leave you with nothing, is to how do we do exactly what you described in whatever capacity that we have, whether we're working for a company or a school board or a military affairs committee or a part of the military, to engage in dialogue with those that we can have the discussion and influence. And again, we may not agree, but we'll have a better understanding of each other and we'll be able to move us forward.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Over here.
Admiral General Major Dennis Apka, Command General Staff College. I had a question about General Welsh just recently appointed General Rand as the new up-and-coming Air Force Global Strike Command commander. Do you see that as a message of legitimacy to ourselves, to our adversaries? And do you think that this will improve our advocacy and stewardship of the nuclear enterprise?
Let me jump into this one. So General Rand and I are good friends. I've known him for 20-some years. What I can tell you is he's a world-class leader. There's many who would say that he doesn't have a nuclear experience. I'll tell you, he sat Victor Alert in an F-16 in Torrejon, Spain in the 80s. He was on the Joint Staff J5 working nuke policy in his lieutenant colonel days. He's been around the world, and the other thing that I think is important, he's commanded in the Middle East, he's commanded the weapons school, he gets about the integration of air power, and he's been in a place that's training our future at Air Education and Training Command, and he's working really hard on changing a culture that existed there. And I think his leadership will be very helpful as we also are engaged in a culture change within our Air Force on all things strategic deterrence related. And I think he'll be a powerful advocate for us moving forward.
I don't know much to add. It certainly sends a message to have a 4-star in charge of that operation. If they had asked me, I would have picked General Wilson.
As we close out this panel, Admiral Connor, General Wilson, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. For everyone in the audience, thank you for your attendance and your attention. But don't forget, you now have a responsibility to go out there and educate and build some advocacy for what you know to be right and true. So thank you.